Hey everyone, before we dive in, a quick note. Why This Beer is looking for a sponsor or two. If your company wants to connect with an engaged audience of brewers and beer lovers, this is a great opportunity to showcase what you do. We're especially interested in suppliers for all ingredients that go into making great beer. If that sounds like you, reach out to us at whythisbeer@gmail.com. Also, a quick heads up, the sound quality in this episode isn't quite where we'd like it to be. We did our best to clean it up, and the conversation is still well worth a listen. Thanks for sticking with us. Oh, and one more thing. We should have asked Tristan about this right off the get-go, but we got a little ahead of ourselves and didn't really mention his new venture, Threefold. Threefold is a new joint brewery location involving Temporal Artisan Ales, Slow Hand Brewing, and Boombox Brewing. They've taken over the former Andina brewing space in Vancouver, and as Tristan mentions, they've already started brewing there. Their front of house area will be opening soon once it's finished. For this interview, we're reaching Tristan at the new Threefold spot in Vancouver. So let's get into it.
All right, welcome to another episode of Why This Beer. Join us as we discuss all the things that make our craft beer scene unique and the people that help sculpt these great brews. I'm Aslan Graves of Main Street Brewing, and as always, joined by Darren Benema of Neighborhood Brewing and Yellow Dog Penticton.
Hello. Thanks, Aslan. Yeah, tonight we're joined by Tristan Stewart of Temporal Artisan Ales, a brewer known for his dedication to barrel aging, blending, and pushing the boundaries of fermentation. Temporal has built a reputation for creating complex farmhouse ales alongside rich, bold stouts and barley wines. We'll talk about his journey as a nomadic brewer, the challenges and rewards of working with oak barrels, and what led him to embrace big barrel-aged stouts. Plus, why should people care about barley wine? And where does the future of funky and heavy beers lead? Grab a drink and join us for a great conversation with Tristan from Temporal Artisan Ales. Welcome, Tristan.
Yeah, welcome.
Be here.
Yeah, so can you share your journey into brewing? How'd you first, what was your first craft beer?
Yeah, first craft beer. Oh man, it probably I think something from Unibrew. I think probably like either Le Findamont or Focus Sauce. They're like kind of spiced double thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. So I don't know if it really counts as like an intentional foray. I was probably like 17, and wanted something strong, and yeah. But like that was probably technically my first craft beer. Yeah, the first kind of foray into craft beer as an intentional adult. I was a fan of the Angry Scotch Ale from Russell Brewing, and that led me into trying a bunch of different craft beers because I just didn't realize that beer could taste kind of like that and have a malt character and stuff. And then I went through a phase when I started home brewing where I was obsessed with Scotch Ale. I think I brewed like 15 batches of Scotch Ale, like 1 gallon at a time, and just like tweaked my recipe ever so slightly each time. And I don't think any of them were very good, but I learned a lot about it. That was years later. But I ended up working at a liquor store around when I, first intentionally was drinking different craft beers. Ended up being in charge of their craft beer. We had a whole cooler door of singles. That was cool. That was where I really like dove deep on things because I was ordering all the beer. I had all the reps, always dropping stuff off, trying to get me to buy things. And I would literally buy everything. The management was like the actual owners were really unhappy with me because our inventory was like humongous. But we had some stuff that was super cool. We got a bunch of cool import things because I established some cool relationships with the import guys. So I got like really obsessed with like De Molen from the Netherlands and like Jolly Pumpkin. I love Jolly Pumpkin. And so that actually is, I don't know if that segues into like, that was probably the first sour beer I ever had. And that was like, holy moly.
Yeah.
It was La Roja from Jolly Pumpkin, which is like their sour red ale. And that kind of blew my mind. So yeah, that was a really long-winded answer, but that was kind of my first foray and early steps into craft beer.
Sweet. And then what kind of bridged you from like your interest in working at liquor stores to kind of like a professional setting? Was it home brewing or working at a brewery?
Yeah, so in terms of becoming like an actual brewer, it was home brewing. I was obsessed with Scotch ales. And then I kind of got into really funky mixed ferm stuff, and I discovered milk, all sorts of. I kind of became addicted to like buying weird yeast online and like putting it in things. So I'd make a big batch of wort and then split it into 1 gallon carboys, and then throw like a just a bunch of little like, bitches from like, a bunch of years because I used to throw those in there too.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was into home brewing, and then that was while I was working at Ordering here, and then I kind of got poached to be a tasting room manager at Trading Post when they first opened, also and that was where I brewed my first ever like big batch of beer. Was just kind of like interested in it, and Tony, the brewer, was like, you can come like basically just work for free for a day and like see if you like it. And I was
Yeah.
like, sure, that sounds great as a keen home brewer. And it was like tough work, but I was like really satisfied. I made like more beer in that one day than I'd ever brewed home brewing by like, 100 times or something absurd like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I worked there for a while, and then ended up getting laid off, or whatever, and then I ended up working at Lupolo as like a just front of house, because I was coming from off of a tasting room management job. I was like, I'll just take whatever.
Yeah.
So worked front of house at Lupolo for I think maybe 6 months, and the whole time I was like kind of starting my own business plan, figuring out what I wanted to do. And then yeah, the assistant brewer at Lupolo left. Stephanie went to go work at Iron Road. I think he's still there. And I kind of stepped in the back and became the assistant brewer. And that was very shortly before I started. I think I brewed like maybe like 4 batches of beer on their system, like on my own.
Yeah.
And then had worked out a contract with them to store a bunch of barrels in their warehouse, and started making my own beer there. So
Sweet.
yeah, kind of dove right into it.
Yeah. So since Lupolo, you've transitioned to a more permanent location, and not immediately Lupolo to there. There's a couple spots in between. But having been like a bit of a nomadic brewer for so long, what were the biggest challenges you faced, and any like unexpected positives, or things that have helped you in this new space?
Yeah, it's a big question. Yeah, when I finished at Lupolo, I ended up moving some stuff to House of Funk, and that's when I picked up the strong barrel aged beer program, like doing barley wines and improved and stuff. So that was in like 2021, I think.
Yeah.
And then I carried on the mixed culture stuff I was doing at Lupolo, House of Funk. But everything I made at House of Funk was made under Slow Hands license. It's all very confusing, but like legally quite sound. So yeah, challenges, I think, with any type of like contract brewing isn't really the word. It's kind of more like tenant brewing, where you're like, you sneak in and make stuff on the weekends or in the evenings or whatever.
Yeah.
And so that's always challenging, just to work around the schedule of the other brewers, and make sure you clean everything up and leave everything the way you left, like the way you found it. There's challenges with that, like working around other people, and then also like trying to do bottle releases in other people's tasting rooms, and making sure that the staff understand what you're doing, even if the manager said it's chill. You have to figure out what are the staff going to do if some random person comes in and says like, hey, I'm looking for this here. Yeah, so there's definitely lots of challenges. It's been great for me, given that my model is to put everything in barrels and to not be, making beer in a kind of traditional way, a modern way, I guess. It's meant that I've been able to kind of sustain my business, brewing a bunch of beer, putting it in barrels, and then slowly pulling down off those barrels and putting beers out here and there.
Yeah. You're not occupying tank time in that sense.
Yeah. Exactly. Literally not at all. Yeah, I have my own little tanks. They're like 12 and 15 heck. I don't really use them. I use them for primarying like barley wines and imperial stouts and stuff, but they're actually like an IBC like transfer, like stainless jacketed transfer tank. So they're meant to be like picked up and jacked around in the sand. So they worked. I fermented some beer in them. It was fine. But yeah, I'm not taking up the brewery's tank time. I'm just kind of taking up some space on the brew house, and that is for some breweries, that's no problem because they only brew once a week. With other breweries, it's like they're brewing, 3-4 times a week, and then you have to sneak in on Sunday.
Right.
But yeah, it's been good. It's given me an opportunity to brew on all sorts of different systems. So I've gotten really good at that, which was a huge boon in kind of taking over this space and figuring out how this brew house worked. We didn't have kind of anyone who was from the company that trained us on how to use it. We just had to figure out how to use it. But thankfully, commercial brew houses are not too different. And even though I never worked on one from this supplier, like I think I was fully comfortable. Like the first brew I had, Chris from Slowhand, and we were doing it together. And then I think like the second brew, I just did it all alone, and that was fine. From that point on, I've done probably like 50 batches now on the system. So yeah, so it's been good.
With brewing through like so many different spaces, things maybe don't go as planned or as expected, whether that's like the extract or, I mean, I'm sure like a lot of your barrel aged beers are double iterated mash, and like
for the strong stuff, there's reiterated mash. Yeah, sometimes
pushing it to the limits for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I was a little worried I was gonna break the container mash tun. Like they never put that much grain in there before, and I was a little worried like the motor that houses the powers the rakes and everything just wouldn't be able to rotate it. And yeah, thankfully it worked, but it was like probably over the weight capacity for the mash tun. Like now that I think about it, like the actual weight for the false bottoms, it was like to the utter brim. Anyway, but yeah, no, there's always unexpected stuff, and like learning how to use each.
Thinking on the fly.
Yeah, learning how to use each brew house is a little different. Like the brew house, and well, I guess, and it's important to note, like when I brew different beers, I have very different kind of mentality and approach to it. So like when I'm brewing a barley wine or a stout, there's so much checking of the gravity throughout like my lauter, and so much, figuring out exactly what my temperature and pH, and being very meticulous about my salt additions and all that stuff. Let alone all the boil time and figuring out what the final gravity is and all that. Yeah. But when I brew Saison, I'm very much like, I'm gonna throw these bags in here, and then just like whatever happens, and maybe I'll throw some salts in there, but like I might forget, and then I'll just like throw a little handful in at the end of my batch or something.
Yeah.
So that
a little bit lower stakes, though. You're not,
exactly. It's a yeast driven,
on like tons and tons of Marisol or whatever it may be.
Yeah, exactly. No, lots of Marisol.
Yeah.
Definitely lower stakes. But yeah, different systems, different people kind of training how to use those systems. Because it's not like I'm figuring out how to use House of Funk's system. I had one of the guys showed me, and I did a few brews with him before I even brewed my own there. I don't know if I answered the question. I kind of forget what it was, but there's definitely lots of challenges brewing beers.
Just learning how to work on the fly.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like that's a skill set I'm now very good at it. I was already pretty good at problem solving brewing specific stuff, and just kind of stuff in general. Pretty like problem solving guy, but now I'm very good at figuring out how brew houses specifically work, which is not a transferable skill to to other parts of my life. But it's great. It's great to have when you take over a brewery that has been empty for
years. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So I think when I first met you, you were kind of setting up shop there at Lupolo Brewing, and I remember you like brought me into the cold room and showed me so many yeast that you had, like from the Yeast Bay and from Milk the Funk. Like some guy sent you this yeast.
Oh yeah, there's definitely like some guy sent me this yeast, and it's like one of my favorite Brett strains ever. Like that. Yeah, I have so many, and it's like it is like some guy, but it's also like he works at a lab in. I think the guy the specific guy I'm thinking of works at a lab in France, and he's like, he like banks yeast for breweries or something, and he like found this really cool.
He's got that Orval.
He's got that
Orval isolate, and
I don't know if it was
one
Orval,
of the first. Vilner Brett. Strains. I've got some of his stuff as well.
This is I think shout out. I think it's Christophe Pichon, if I'm thinking of the right guy. But he was what a king, like the best yeast. Yeah.
Anyway, a favorite yeast that you like that you've used, or something that was like super unique, or
Yeah, well, he had a Brett. If it's the same guy, Christoph had a Brett that was excellent. I forget what it was. It was just like Brett Bruxellensis. It wasn't like any weird other strain, but it was a
right?
specific isolate from somewhere in Europe. It might have been from Berliner Weiss, like an old bottle or something. And I really liked that yeast. It ended up making its way into a bunch of barrels, and then like is now just kind of abound. I have lots of like crossover between barrels with my cultures. Like I don't, when I'm pulling stuff out of barrels, I'm not very careful about. I mean, like intentionally not careful about not infecting between different batches of sour barrels or mixed culture barrels. Like if I stick my wand in a barrel and I pull like 100 liters out of a beer that's very sour, I'm like not gonna clean and sanitize the wand before I stick
Right.
it into another barrel. As long as it's not like I would never do that with like a barley wine barrel.
Right,
But
right.
if I was pulling out, maybe
Yeah.
I've got a barrel of Saison that isn't sour, thus inoculate it with
Eventually, they all hit symbiosis. Yeah.
a little bit. Yeah, there's a bit of that going on for sure.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Every brewer has influential beers that guide them. For you, whether it's like a local beer like Four Winds Operas or Hair of the Dog's Adambier, what's like a North Star beer for you, or something that has kind of influenced you in your beer making?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, yeah, Hair of the Dog Adam is for sure right up there. That's a pretty special beer to me. Inspired me to make my Adam beer, which is like one of my favorite beers. There's some barrels of it like 8 feet away from me right now. And yeah, so that I would say that's kind of a bit of an obscure one too. Like who brews an Adam beer? Not
Yeah.
really anyone. But and it's not even like really a historically accurate Adam beer. It's like a modern Adam beer, so it's not. I think to be historically accurate, it would have to be like a little bit sour and
Right.
kind of funky. And mine is very clean, but still has the trademark smokiness. I kind of describe it to people as like a mildly smoky ale, which I think is kind of pretty accurate. I have
Nice.
some in like a couple peated bourbon casks, not bourbon, sorry, peated whiskey casks. Smelling really good. It's really good. Yeah, so Hair of the Dog Adam's a good one. Jolly Pumpkin La Roja, which I mentioned earlier, and Adambier. That was probably like the first Saison, like real good actual Saison I had. And that kind of blew my mind a little bit. I think I probably had Saison before.
Sure. Yeah.
Didn't make much of that big of an impression. So yeah, so those probably would be a couple good North Star beers. Four Winds also had the Wildflower Saison, like the very first batch in like 2014 or something. That blew my mind. I thought that was awesome. And then I remember they went on to do, I think it was Emma, they put on a beer with some crab apples, and that was like
Right.
the first
Oh, yeah.
beer release I'd ever like gone on my way to go to.
Yeah.
And like lined up with like a bunch of other people who were just like stoked to be there. That had never happened for me before. So I don't know that it had ever happened in the city before.
No,
So
I remember the same, and I echo that. Like, I don't think that had happened before. I remember people were like, "There's a limit," like
yeah,
to the beer. Like that was a first for
yeah.
sure
And I,
in
and I think
Vancouver.
I brought Kat with me. I think I can't remember. I think I had brought Kat with me, and it was because I wanted to get extra bottles. And like she was cool with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I just like kidnapped her and we went and got the bottles. I forget. I'm pretty sure that's what happened. It was this was a while ago, right? But yeah, that was kind of inspirational to me in that I liked Four Winds. I liked what they were doing. Like not past tense. I still like Four Winds. I like Four Winds. But I liked what they were doing, and I was really keen on that beer. And then I was just like, you get kind of caught up in the excitement of it, like bottle release. It's a special beer. There's like, it's only gonna be there for a couple hours, so you got to go get some.
Yeah.
And there's like 100 other people all lined up, and that's just there's something special about that, I think. And so that's kind of always been. I mean, it's been in my mind when I think about like trying to curate this culture of like come and get it because I've only got like 500 bottles of it, and like you don't want to miss it. It's going to be great.
Well, like it's on one hand, it's a great like business plan, right? Because you can quickly sell through a lot of product, but it's also bringing a lot of people together that like all share this interest in the beer,
exactly.
right? And so if everyone's lining up and probably staying for a beer after, talking about the beer, like that's cool. event in a way, like to be putting on without really putting on an event too.
Yeah, totally. And I think like, that's what's happened for me. Like people come out to my releases and they come and, there's less of a line these days. There's still sometimes, but people come out and there's a community of people. I see at every single release and I'm always happy to see them. I know most of them by name. I'm like, it's great. It's fantastic. And so it helps a lot, like having an established kind of crew and that some people will come, even like on my worst release, I still manage, there's still probably a couple hundred bottles that go at the door. So that's nice. It's like, you said something about how it's like, it's nice to know you can move that beer quickly. And it's like, yeah, that is nice, but it also took me like 3 years to make it. So like, my sunk costs at this point are astronomical, and the amount of beer, value I have on hand at any given time is ridiculous. But every now and then I'll package up 1% of what I have and sell it. And that makes it all worth it.
Sweet.
Yeah. So speaking of beers, now that you've got a space, one of the beers you graciously gave us, your table saison. We should chat a bit about that.
Let's open it.
First temporal core product.
It is, yeah. So it's the first time I'm doing this left-handed. That seems like a mistake. It's the first time I've ever kind of attempted to make a beer that's like going to be available all the time. It'll be like on draft.
Cheers.
Yeah, so it's a table saison. It's fermented in this big fruiter, which is kind of off to the side of me here. It's mixed culture. There's funky things going on. It's just like, it's 3.6%. It's refreshing. It's very dry. It's bitter, but not too bitter.
Yeah. Nice. Really spritzy.
Yep. That's why I was really intent on bottling it. I know people, the industry in general doesn't like bottles. You can't make a beer like this in cans. Like there are there's lots of beers made with Saison yeast, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're a very good Saison, And I think like to be a good Saison, it's having it in something that can handle like 3 volumes of CO2 is kind of a necessary thing.
Right.
So I packed this up in 330 ml bottles, which I'm going to do like by the 4-pack. So that's what you guys have. That's what I have here.
Sweet. Nice.
And then I've also done some 750s, nice big green bottles, which I think are good for like sharing or just drinking. I think they're great. And then I also filled up some magnums. I think it's cool to like, if you're going to be going to a dinner party or something and you want to bring something to share, what's better than like 1.5 liters of table saison? I think that's fantastic.
For the table. That's great.
Exactly.
It's
and that's another thing too. I think it's a cool, as an opportunity here to have a magnum for like for table service. Like you could order a magnum and split it with your friends. I think that's a super cool experience as well. Yeah.
Sweet. Well,
So,
that's great.
Yeah, it's got a bunch of different Saison strains. That's what did the bulk of fermentation. It's a bunch of different stuff, and then there's a bunch of Brett as well. Some things I don't even know what they are anymore. It's just like propped up from a bottle that I like that I have.
Are they? Are you doing a primary fermentation with Sack and then pitching Brett after, or it's all at once?
Yeah,
and kind of
all
see
at
what
once.
works?
Yeah, it lives in the fooder. So it's since it lives in the fooder, it just all kind of happens. And then I'm also treating. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, are you going to be running it kind of like a Solera in that sense?
That's my question too.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
And filling it?
Yeah. So I actually just finished emptying it for the first time. So this batch was in there for 6 months in total. Some of it was bottled like starting around 4.5 months, maybe 4 months. So I'm aiming for like a 4 to 6 month kind of turn on the fooder, which is kind of, you tell people that your core beer is going to be 4 to 6 months, and most core brewers will like have a good laugh at you.
Yeah.
I said that to Ben Coley the other day, and he was ridiculous, but also like very on brand.
Yeah, it's pretty quick for you.
Yeah. I think So 4 to 6 months is an improvement on what I've been doing by a long shot. And so the plan is to treat it as a Solera now that it's empty. I'm going to be actually refilling it in a couple of days with like a base Saison that's going to go in these barrels. So I need to inoculate them, and I want to inoculate the same culture that I like. So I'm going to brew in a couple days. I'll cast out into the foeder, wait for it to start just kind of ripping along, and then once it's like nearing the end of fermentation, I'll probably just push it right over, fill up all of these 600 liter barrels, and then the foeder's empty, ready to go again. I'll brew right into it again, like next week at the end of the week or something.
Nice.
Should be good.
That's a cool idea.
Yeah, and then like the way the foeder is, it's kind of it's one of those horizontal, like it's kind of shaped like one of these barrels. So there's always a bit of beer in the belly that you can't really access unless you like really were motivated to.
Yeah.
there's no like
drain.
Absolute bottom drain.
Yeah.
The drain is around 200 liters, 300 liters. So there's always 200 or 300 liters left behind, and that is predominantly probably yeast and goop. But that's where the magic lives, and then the barrel just kind of exists as a home for those things, right? And that culture will end up in these barrels whenever I brew into them again, or top them up. It'll do the bulk fermentation, and whatever happens.
Nice.
Rad.
And for hops in this, like, are you pretty set on your recipe, or is it kind of like aim for 3.6 and you'll see how it'll evolve?
Yeah. For hops, it's kind of all over the place. Yeah. It's this batch, I think I mash hopped it with some nice organic Cascade that was around. And then I think I finished it off with a bit of Liminal at the end of the boil. I'm not too particular. I feel pretty open to all sorts of different hops. I think the batch that I'm brewing in a few days has got some weird, like, I'm going to throw a bag of, I think it's like XJA 286 or something. It's like a South American, experimental variety. Yeah, not South American, South African experimental variety.
Yeah.
And I was like, they say it has some interesting citrus, like specifically like bergamot, and like, I don't know, a couple other interesting citrus characteristics. And it's predominantly just like citrusy. And I really like Cascade, Amarillo, those sorts of things in Saison. So I thought, I'll do that. Let's see how that goes.
Sweet.
Yeah, but I'm not like a purist. I'm not like going to be like, it has to be noble hops. It has to be Saaz. Like I'm like that when I'm brewing like, Czech Pilsner or something. It's got to be some Saaz, but I'm not too particular with these things.
Not really like aged hops either, or anything like that in your sour program?
No, I've never done aged hops. I've been wanting to, but the problem is like, you've got to buy a bale, or at least a mini bale from a hop farm to be able to get a quantity of leaf hops. And I've like gone as far as kind of pricing it out, and then realized I'm going to bust this up into like some burlap sacks to age, in the ceiling near the brewery. And then I realized, like, well, this is actually going to take quite a bit of space, and then the whole brewery is going to kind of smell like this. They smell really like cheesy, and it's
rotting
kind of
hops.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Not rotting ideally, but like kind of this like cheesy smell. And it really does stink up the place. It's like pretty intense. So so I've kind of never really done the aged hops things. I've thought about like trying to source some. I know there's like Yakima Valley Hops will sell you like their lambic hop blend or whatever, which I think is just old hops. They pelletize, or maybe
all the trimmings on the floor.
They like intentionally do something to them to oxidize them and pelletize that up. And I have had beers with those hops that were awesome. I think that's what Dagger I'd used in their Decade, I think it was called. I don't know. They did a beer that was 10th anniversary beer, and it was really good. Aged hops, like, had that nice kind of like almost lambic quality to it. So I'd like to mess around with that at some point. I think it's just like, I don't really have the space
flow thing.
And also like processing whole leaf hops on a system like this is not super ideal. We don't have a hop back or anything like that.
Right.
I'd be bagging it up and like hanging a bag in the kettle, and it's just it sounds messy. So for now aged hops is not something I've really ever messed with.
And are you when you're priming your bottles, are you re-yeasting as well, or are you just using the yeast that's the culture that's already in there?
For these ones, I didn't re-yeast the table Saison bottles.
So like with this beer, with you not adding any yeast, you're allowing, I guess, primarily the sack and Brett that's there to do the carbonation. Are you noticing a lot of additional character then? How long are you letting it rest in bottles?
Yeah. So I think so these have been in bottles for I guess a couple months now. And it's definitely a little funkier than it was in the foeder, which I'm happy about. But it's not egregiously so. It's at a pretty
Right.
pleasant level right now. I'm sure that will grow a bit as time goes on, but I
You're
would
gonna get
consider it still
people.
pretty fresh.
You're gonna get people seeking this out, like specifically at least a year post package, or it'll be like
Maybe,
Orval.
yeah,
Right.
maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe we'll see. I definitely think like it's definitely a little bit funkier than it was, and I'm happy about it. I'm into it. I think like in a little beer like this, when it's like under 4%, it's so hard to get like a depth of character
Yeah.
to make you just want to have another sip. Part of it is it being super dry, and there's also like the interesting little hop characteristics going on, and there's also a bunch of like alternative grains in here. It's like it's probably only like 40-ish% barley. I'd have to go dig up the recipe, but there's a lot of spelt, there's oats, there's wheat. Uh, there might even be like a bag of triticale. Uh, there's rye. Like there's literally like you name it. I
Yeah.
probably threw a bag in or two or three.
Yeah.
I really like spelt and saison. So this is like, yeah, I don't know. So there's lots of that stuff that kind of gives it a bit of depth of flavor. And then relying on the yeast to do things, do its thing.
Yeah. Is that just to give it some complexity? Because yeah, otherwise like a 3.5% or 3.5 or whatever percent Pilsner wheat thing might be a bit boring.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
can be a little bit boring, and it's just like a little thin or a little watery. It's got to have like a
Right.
little bit of something. This beer has a nice kind of
Yeah.
breadiness to it. That's kind of unexpected.
There's
I
like an
don't know.
implied sweetness in the Aroma that's quite nice.
Yeah,
Like,
and it's like not
kind of
sweet.
like
It's definitely
honey.
like
Yeah.
I think this beer is like it's like negative 0.6 Play-Doh or something. Like it's like super super dry.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but yeah,
Right.
really just like meant to be like a refreshing, easy drinking thing. I think the 4 packs will be a cool thing, but I'm also like, I've never sold beer in a 4 pack before of bottles, let alone in this climate of beer marketing.
Yeah.
So we'll see how that goes. But I always have the 750s as well. I could fall back on. But I think people in general just are kind of leaning away from bigger bottles. But then again, something like this, I would have no problem splitting a big bottle with Cat over dinner or something, So
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it's a fun project. It's fun for me to have something that I will, I'm gonna have some taps. This is my first time ever having a place where I can put beer on tap, and so I'm gonna have a couple taps to keep full all the time. So this will be one thing that I'd
Right.
like to kind of keep on tap as much as I can. So that'll be
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, exactly. Nice to have that filling the taps and a good volume where you can kind of, and you could probably even take some out, of the food, or if you're really desperate, a couple
Yeah,
kegs here and there, right? And that's
exactly. If
again
I had
here, right?
to, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, force carb some
So,
up or something. I
so
also
the
use this as a base for a bunch of stuff. I like did a version of it that was on blueberries. So blueberries were like the only fruit I worked with last year. It was an awful year for fruit, but I got like
yeah.
a couple 100 pounds of blueberries, put some table saison on it, and made a very purple beer. And then like I had some in gin barrels, so I did a gin barrel version. Blended some with an old
Nice.
Gewürztraminer sour. It works really well for blending with stuff like that. That's like quite sour. I've made a lot of very sour beer in the past, and
Yeah.
I want very sour beer less and less these days. And so I thought, what better than to just like go 50-50 on it and lightens the acidity, brightens the whole thing up. It still has like plenty of fruit characteristics. So,
Yeah. Sweet.
yeah, lots of opportunity to do a version that's dry hopped or with some spices or whatever. It's kind of
Yeah.
that's the fun thing for me about doing a bigger batch of something is like I can.
Yeah.
Previously, I'd do that and I would just split the batch into a bunch of barrels, and then like whatever would happen, and the barrels will turn out differently, and that's kind of fun.
Yeah.
But now at least I can bulk ferment it somewhere and then do a secondary treat it secondarily somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
You touched on it a bit, but like, yeah, when it comes to barrel aging and like you're playing a lot with like the different types of wood, the different spirits that have been in that wood or wine. Do you have any like favorite type of wood or particular spirit that like?
Yeah. I think like for the saison side of things, to me it doesn't matter. Like I'm mostly working with these are like neutral wine barrels. The foeder is pretty much neutral. Um, for the barley wines and stouts, I really like bourbon barrels. I kind of work with all sorts of stuff though. I've got like a mushroom whiskey barrel from Odd Society that is super cool. I've got single malt barrels. I've got some peated whiskey barrels from France. I've got cognac barrels. I've maple
I remember
syrup.
having,
Yeah,
I think it was that Amburana barrel.
yeah, Amberana. That's what I was getting to. Yeah, so that might be one of my
Like,
favorites because it's so unique. It's one of the only. It might actually be the only new barrel I've ever bought. It came
Oh, wow.
straight to me, like literally straight from cooperage in Brazil, and it's Amberana is like a Brazilian hardwood. It has it's kind of like Brazilian cherry, I think is like the type of wood, and it has crazy like baking spice aroma. It's like super potent cinnamon and vanilla, and it's just wonderful. It smells super incredible. Like I've never smelt wood so potent in my life, which is crazy. Like when I got the barrel, it came in on a day when it was raining outside, and I like loaded it onto a barrel rack kind of in the rain. I put it into the warehouse where I was storing my barrels, and the next day I walked in like on the other side of the warehouse, opened the door, and I could smell like the air was just like thick with this crazy like
Wow.
wood smell. Yeah, it's super cool wood. So yeah, I would say that's probably my favorite. I've used it in a bunch of beers because it's a new barrel, so it has tons of flavor to give. Like the first couple turns, I had like filled it with beer, I ended up like blending way back because
Right.
it was just
So
way
intense.
too strong. Yeah, like
Yeah.
almost medicinal, so much spice. It was just like too intense. So I blended it way back and like 50-50, 60-40, whatever. And that was good for the first couple turns. And now I think the beers are coming out a little bit more, in line. Yeah, it's been good. I'm realizing now super highly carbonated table saison is not the best podcast beer. It's like
Yeah.
the burpiest of all beers.
Yeah.
Yes, but
Is that barrel, is it toasted too? Or like lightly
yeah,
toasted
it's a
or?
medium toast. Yeah.
Okay.
They it's like a proper cooperage. They do all sorts of stuff. They mainly make these barrels for cachaça, which is like a sugarcane spirit.
Okay.
In Brazil, and that's I think Amberana is like can be commonly used. If you find a barrel aged cachaça, it probably was in an Amberana barrel. I think is my understanding of Brazilian spirit barrel production.
Okay.
The same cooperage also makes barrels from a bunch of other South American woods, which I think is super cool. And something else that I'm like low key obsessed with in my beers that I've used a bunch over the years is tonka beans, which are like a little. It's kind of like a little nut, and it's like a tree nut. It comes from, or a seed, and it comes from these big, gigantic trees that grow in Brazil. And this cooperage actually makes barrels of the wood from the tree that tonka beans come from.
Oh,
And
cool.
I really want one, but they're like, it's like by the time it got here, it'd probably be like $2,500 Canadian for the barrel, which is like
Yeah.
already new barrels are expensive, and that's like even more expensive. And the dollar's awful right now, and it's a U.S. importer, so now there's who knows, maybe there's gonna be a bunch of tariffs on that. Like, so anyways, that's on hold for now. But I love tonka beans; they're great.
You got to get them to ship you the wood and give you some instructions, like an IKEA like dresser, but it's like a barrel.
I can put it together, man. I've taken apart so many barrels at this point. Was like, we used to at Lupolo, we used to fruit directly in the barrels. I don't really like doing that because you have to take them apart after. But that was at Lupolo, we'd do that, and then you'd have to take them apart, and that was as the brewer, my job a lot of the time would be to take all the rack the beer out and then take the barrel apart and clean out all the fruit and then put the barrel back together. So at least I'm very proficient at like taking the heads on and off. So
it's easy to take apart and empty out,
and then making it back
together.
Getting it to seal,
getting it back together, and sealing. The moment of truth, after you've spent all that time trying to get the head on.
We fruit in all our
the wood. It'll usually swell pretty good.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever had one that I leaked in a way that I couldn't fix, like literally knock on wood, but like it hasn't happened yet. Been able to kind of plug all holes, so to speak.
Nice. Well, you kind of mentioned tonka beans. You've used some other unique ingredients as well, like cherry and other stone fruit pits, elephant heart plums, pineapple weed. Like what ingredient has been your favorite? I guess you kind of talked about tonka beans, but maybe something else that's also keeps you interested, or something that you're excited to use, I guess, in the future.
Yeah, that's good. Good question. Yeah, tonka beans I love, but we already talked about that. I really like. I have a guy who grows Balaton cherries, which are awesome. They're kind of like the closest thing. They're Hungarian tart cherry variety. They're kind of the closest thing we have in North America to the Belgian like Scherbeeks cherry, which is the classic. I'm
Yeah.
probably butchering that. The classic Greek cherry that you'd find
Right.
in Lambic. Um, they have this crazy like cinnamon character from the pits. So I've I've done a beer where I like took a bunch of the pits. I got my cherry guy because he runs them through a pitter for like I don't know some of his other customers. So he has a thing that pits the cherries. I usually get them whole and then I just throw them in the beer and like whatever happens happens.
Yeah.
But I got him to give me like a bucket just full of pits, and I threw a beer on the pits because I was like, this is like such a cool flavor. It's so cinnamony and almondy, and yeah, really it tastes kind of like I made for the pits when I did the beer with that. I was making a clean beer, and so I ended up making kind of like a tincture with the pits with some alcohol, and it literally tasted like those little cinnamon heart candies. Like it was just like pure
wow.
cinnamon, like sweet cinnamon. It was super cool.
Yeah.
It didn't even taste like cherries at all, which was interesting. So that's kind of a fun ingredient that a lot of people wouldn't have messed with is cherry pits. But yeah, the actual cherries themselves are super flavorful too. So yeah, shout out to John Jobs Toft. He's the best. He has orchards in Oyama and Okanagan. And yeah, he lost his whole crop I think last year. It was like last year was just the worst for everyone who grows fruit. But yeah, I'm excited to work with this fruit again. I actually made a cherry wine as like I made it in my house as a like non-commercial product. I got a bunch of his cherries. That was actually how I got the pits because I got him to pit some cherries for me so I could press them so I could make cherry wine.
Inspired by like Frederiksdal.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Frederiksdal's crazy. They make some super cool. Yeah, I didn't want to like ferment it, leave it out in the sun. They do it in carboys.
Santa Cruz apple juice container on your deck.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, I did it in a carboy like a normal home brewer. But I ended up like putting it in a rye barrel and then I like watered it. It wasn't enough to fill the rye barrel, so I topped it up with like some like kit wine juice. And let it just kind of do its thing, and it turned out to be a cool little weird aperitif thing. But obviously, like not something I can't sell that. It's not. I don't have a wine license. I can't legally make that. It was totally a homebrew project that I made at home.
Yeah.
But that's an example of a derivative of the ingredients. One of my favorite ingredients, the Balaton cherry.
So you kind of had this. You started Temporal as more of a funky beer, like sour beer focused project, and then in the last few years, kind of shifted to more of like big imperial stouts, Munich wines, as you said, like an Adambier. What was kind of the impetus for the change for that? Just like personal interest, or like what was the lack of appetite for farmhouse beers, or what?
Yeah, we know that's true. Yeah, we all know that's true. It's like yeah, no, I'm fighting an uphill battle on the farmhouse front. It's always been an uphill battle. There's there's a lot of people that really like Saison, and there's a lot of people who do not like Saison at all. And there's also like a third group that is a lot of people who have had a lot of beer that's called Saison that isn't. At the risk of sounding pretentious, it's not really Saison. Like, yes, you could just throw a Saison yeast into something and you've made a Saison, I guess. But there's like, there's certain things like I'm talking about the bottle, how it's important, at least to me, and I think important to the presentation of the beer to have it be carbonated like fairly highly. There's lots of things that make a Saison the way it is. And there's lots of beers that are like, say Saison on the label that aren't necessarily those things. But that's not the question you asked me. Yeah, so I think like I kind of switched gears a little bit, but it was kind of always something I always wanted to do. I always intended to do. It was in my initial business plan. It was just something I didn't really have the space for at Lupolo, and also didn't really. Even if I'd had the space, I didn't really have like the budget to bring in a bunch of spirit barrels or bring in like a bunch of extra equipment. I'm really paranoid about, these beers cross-contaminating, stuff like that, especially if it's like a barley wine that finishes at 11 Plato or something. That's like enough,
Right.
that's like potentially another 4 or 5% alcohol that could be formed from that, and like an intense amount of re-fermentation. So I keep these things so separated that literally like I was brewing them at 2 separate breweries so that I could keep them, like I had 2 separate sets of everything.
Yeah.
All my barley wine and stuff existed. Like there was like a kilometer of ocean between, I'd had to go to North Van if I wanted to make Saison. So
Right.
I've had no cross contamination to date. I'm super careful. I send things off to a lab. They get looked at and made sure, and everything's been nice and clean. So that's been good. But yeah, no, it's something I always intended to do. I just didn't really have the capacity to do it. It wasn't until I kind of got the kick from Lupolo. I say got the kick. It was time for me to kind of move on from that space. And
Yeah.
and it wasn't until that happened that I kind of was like, I have the capacity now to dive into this in a way that I didn't initially. And I dove into it like super hard. I bought like, I think I bought like 60 barrels from 3 or 4 different brokers and coopers. And then I brewed, like 120 heck of very strong beer. I had to set up a spirits license container, which is a whole, so I could properly pay excise. Also, like properly, I know the beer is like 14.5%. I want to be able to put 14.65% on the label.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah,
and
totally.
also like
because
big selling
the
point.
limit in BC is 13.9, right?
11.9.
11.9.
11.9. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Yeah, so in the eyes of the BC government, once you're over 11.9, it's not beer. Yeah.
Well, they don't make a lot of strong beers.
Yeah. But that's okay. It's like who does, right? And that's the other thing is I always felt that was a market that was super underserved here. There was a few releases, maybe like once a year from a couple breweries. Like there was a few of them around. Every now and then someone would come up with a barrel-aged imperial stout. I'd get really stoked about it. Me and like 5 other people, who cares? Would get really stoked about it. But no one was really doing it to the level that I envisioned kind of doing that project. And so I dove into it super hard. I brewed like 120 heck of barley wine and imperial stout and Munichwine and quad and Adambier. And then I sat it in barrels, and honestly, I brewed all of that beer in 2021, the latter half of 2021, and I'm still pulling down barrels from it. So for my model of, like brew it all, and like some of those brew days were awful, like 20-hour brew days where I'd leave the house at like 8 a.m. and I'd get home like 2 a.m. and it was just awful. But it's the sort of thing, like it would be an awful day, and then like I've forgotten. The pain is long forgotten now. Now I just have like barrels and barrels of like double barrel aged barley wine because I've wrapped it into new barrels over the years or whatever. So it's worked really well for me to sustain me to invest that money up front, brew all that beer, kick off that side of my business, and then to be sustained by that is like, I could pull down a couple barrels, package them up, do a bottle release, sell them off, and then I'm like, that pays my rent for the next couple months, business rent.
Yeah.
Not that I pay myself. Wouldn't that be fun?
You're dreaming.
Yeah.
I was just going to jump in that. We should get into the beer. You're right. Now.
Yeah, we should. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what you guys have, not what I have, but what you have is Munichwine. It was a beer I made. I brewed it in 2021 with the rest of the Void beers. It's called Minimal Space. It aged in Buffalo Trace barrels, I think is what it says. Whatever it says on the label, that's what I did. In Buffalo Trace barrels.
No, you got it.
Yeah, and a year and a half in the barrel, fresh, wet barrel. It was just one barrel, so I basically pulled that whole barrel, packaged it all. It all became this beer. So Munichwine, you asked me earlier, I think you mentioned earlier, like something about Munichwine. I always have a good giggle about it. It's kind of a new sub style of beer.
It's one more modern.
Yes, it's more modern. It's essentially a derivative of barley wine, with the base, instead of being Maris Otter or another pale malt, it's Munich malt. This beer has, I think, 3 different types of Munich malt. It's 100% Munich malt. There was some Munich malt from Mecca Grade, which is a farm I buy grain from sometimes in Oregon. They're like 4th or 5th generation farmers and malters. And they have one type of Munich malt. And so that was, I think, about half the grist. The other half was a mix of
kind of like a light or dark.
Theirs is like on the darker side. Yeah, it's kind of, if you were to make a beer that was all their Munich malt, it would be kind of like on the brown kind of color spectrum.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's where some of the color comes from. And then the other half was mostly best malls, Munich, best Munich, and then there's a bit of dark Munich as well.
Nice.
And then, yeah, it was boiled for like, I think 9 hours or something like that. And that's where some of the color comes from as well, just from the concentration. It's less like actual kettle caramelization. The kettle container is a steam kettle, so it's not direct fire. So there's not like actual Maillard effect going on. It's more just like the evaporative power of removing a bunch. I removed probably like 10 heck of water from that via steam.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where the color change comes from, less the actual chemical Maillard reaction.
Yeah, I was trying to jump in earlier. Oh, sorry, Aslan. I was just trying to jump in earlier when you were talking about like 20-hour brew days.
Yeah.
And I guess if people don't know, like, it's not just because Tristan doesn't know how to like run a brew house. It's that he's trying to do these long boils for, like you said, 9 hours. It's not like the lauter might be long because you're doing a double mash as well, probably. But like it's because you're literally concentrating it down from a high amount of volume to a small amount of liquid.
Yeah, like that container, the brew house efficiency, or I guess like not brew house efficiency, but the boil off efficiency is it's about, I think it's like 0.75 heck per hour is what I saw in container. And I think for this beer, I want to say I filled the kettle to like 23 or 24 heck. And then, I boiled it until it was like 17, 18, something like that. So yeah, just like significant concentration is what it comes down to. And that's not even like the craziest one. I've done some like this one I think started at 33 or 34 Plato. I did a beer with Kyle from Horace, and that was over 40, which was monstrosity. I think it started at 41 Plato. And that was like a 11 and a half hour boil plus some sugar addition plus.
I was gonna say, is it all malt?
Yeah, that one had. We wanted to do something Canadian, so we got the one I did with Horace had some maple syrup, some nice like dark grade A maple syrup, extra strong dark flavor or whatever they call it, and then it had some really caramelized honey. I got some honey that's like essentially the way they heat up the honey when they're kind of centrifuging it out of the panes from the hive. And so there's always some honey that ends up like being overheated at the end after they've kind of drained the centrifuge because they need to warm it up so it flows out of the wax. There's always a little bit that's like overheated and ends up like almost black. It's like super dark, and that has a super cool flavor. And so so I proposed that to Kyle, and then I think we also put in some brown sugar. Because he puts brown sugar in all his beers. He was like, you got to do it. You got to put brown sugar in it. That's like, it's like one of my hallmarks. And so we did that. And so, there's a bunch of different sugars in it. But ended up being like 41 Plato.
With these beers as like are you using a same primary yeast for all of them? Like, how are you selecting a yeast that's going to take you far enough?
Right.
The characters you want.
That's a good question. Yeah. It's the Munich wine was just like US-05, big old pitchy US-05, and oxygenated very heavily. So that did the trick. Munich wine went from I think 33, 34 Plato down to I think it finished around 10, maybe 9. And I was happy with that. That was like a good amount of fermentation for that beer. Most of the void beers I think were 05. Some of them were San Diego super yeast because that happens to rip through things a little better. There was a quad I brewed that had some Abbey yeast. But generally it's US-05 has just done it for me. I'm not a big like liquid yeast fan. I don't like getting liquid yeast because it's so expensive to get up here. So I don't frequently use like Scottish ale yeast. There's no good dried Scottish ale yeast that I found. So that would be the thing that I want if I was doing a Scotch ale, for example. But even for barley wine,
So your true passion seems to be the Scotch ale thing. It's ever since the homebrew days.
I know.
Yeah.
So when at threefold are we going to see the Temporal Scotch ale?
That's right.
I've thought about it, but really, I just don't think there's enough Scotch ale stands out there, I just don't think the people would be here for it. I can barely get people on board with Munich one, so Scotch ale, yeah. I haven't thought about it in a long time, but every now and then I'm just like, yep, I did brew like, 20 batches of Scotch ale, and they were all a little different, and some of them were awful, and some of them were, I thought, pretty good at the time. But I think I
That's
probably
the
just hadn't had,
that's
very
the
good
next
one.
temporal series. Yeah.
Just a bunch
Yeah.
of Scotch ales. No,
Scotch ales, yeah.
I've kind of pared things down a little bit. Like part of that big push to kick off the dark beer series for me was like I brewed a bunch of Imperial Stout. I knew I had to do Imperial Stout. So I brewed a bunch of Imperial Stout. I did barley wine, Munichwine, Adambier, quad, and an old ale. And that was kind of, or like a stock ale. And that was kind of the spread. And I was kind of like a little curious, like, what do people care about?
Right.
What am I making just because I want to make it, which is Adambier? And then like what, like if I'm not hitting like a strong beer style, like what should I be hitting, right? And yeah, I think like there's a lot of overlap between Scotch ale and barley wine, and getting people on board with barley wine is already like a lot of people have misunderstandings, or they've had like awful barley wine before in the past, or because there's a lot of kind of shit ones out there. So getting people on board with even trying something that's like 15% that took me 3 years to make, and like I've spent thousands of dollars putting in different barrels, is not an easy thing. And it's like, especially when it's like $20-$25 a bottle, like some of these bottles end up being. So trying to not be too far reaching. I've kind of pared things down a little bit in the brews that I've done here. But anyway, yeah. I forget what your question is.
Well, it's hard to almost explain this kind of a product, I find, to people. Like, I'll buy it often, and like, especially if I'm having like people over at our party, and like just share it too. Also because it's like 14%.
Yeah.
So sometimes I need
that
one
one
person.
is like 14.8% or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's like, it's good to share. Sometimes. But like, just it's to say that it's like a strong beer kind of is not really giving it the credence it deserves.
Yeah.
Like it's really its own thing. It's more on the like a light spirit more than anything, like in that cocktail world.
Totally.
Yeah, more than
like,
anything. So
barely carbonated. It's got that depth of malt character, but it's strong. I really go for I try really hard, and I feel like I've been pretty successful in making things that are strong but not hot. A lot of people, like, you'd be amazed. Like I had an IPA the other day that was like 7%, and it was just like pure fusel alcohol, and I was like, get this away from me. I hate this flavor. Like it's cool to me that a well-made 14-15% beer can taste spirit heavy and forward, but not hot. Like you don't swallow and you go, "Ooh, this is like burning my throat." I attribute that to like a long, cool fermentation, not letting things free rise very much, and then also to like being in barrels for that one was 18 months, and then it's been in the bottle for another probably 18 months since then. So, yeah, I don't know. Fusel alcohols are the worst. If you have a beer and it tastes hot, you should tell the brewery that it's not a good thing to do.
Are you controlling the temperature, like when you're fermenting?
Yeah. For those beers, I think for those beers, I let it free rise like a couple degrees. I pitched a few degrees below where I wanted it, let it free rise a couple degrees at the beginning of fermentation, and just like held it there for the rest of it. And for like the 05, that was like 14 degrees or 15 degrees or something. Pretty cold for the yeast. And so that just means that it's fermenting slowly, so there's not, it doesn't pick up as much kind of kinetic energy, it doesn't heat itself up so much, and doesn't stress itself up so much, and so just I mean, like I'm kind of just intentionally slowing down the fermentation, which in most breweries you never want to do, because you want your tanks to be freed up for the next beer always, right? You don't want an empty tank sitting there. You don't want a beer sitting in the tank for a month, but a month is how long it took that Munichwine to ferment. And like at a month, I was like, good, this has finally been done for like a week, and it's definitely done. And I'm going to put it in barrels confident that it won't, continue to do anything. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. Not a normal beer, that's for sure. And explaining that to people and getting people on board with that, especially people who've never tried it, is tough. So that's one thing I'm looking forward to here is I'm going to have one of these beers. I call it the Void series, the strong series of beer. I'm going to have one on tap all the time. So I'll have one that's always you know, it won't always be
Yeah.
barley wine, but it might be an imperial stout, but it's always going to be like 14%.
Yeah.
So
Also,
kind of
just
fun.
like I think having someone like yourself, you do a really good job with your social media presence and like explaining that you're not like rushing the process, like why things take longer. Having that consumer education side, I think, is very important. Like
Yeah.
lots of times, if like I'll see one of your beers, I'll be like, holy shit, I'm really glad you did that, because I definitely don't want to.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know?
no,
And
you're
now I
not
get
the
to
only
taste it.
brewer who's told. Yeah, you're not the only brewer that's told me that. It's like, I forget who it was. Someone was like, "Yeah, I can't believe you put like 400 pounds of raspberries into 300 liters of beer. That's ridiculous." And I
Yeah.
was like, "Yep,
Yeah.
yeah, it was ridiculous, and it sucked. And like, you shouldn't do that. But also, I made this beer, and it's, you know,
Yeah.
it tastes like raspberry juice basically. So like, that's kind of fun." Um,
Yeah.
yeah, you're not the first person to tell me that. And yeah, that's something I always try to hit hard. That's like kind of like I've been doing some introspection a little bit as part of this. The threefold thing is kind of like thinking about how, like, what is my brand actually, you know, rather than it just being um, like I as the guy, like you know, I make the creative decisions, and I have to decide what I want to be doing for things, and um, kind of realizing like that's really important to me. That's what I'm trying to get at. This is a horrible explanation. I
Yeah.
should have thought about this a little bit beforehand. But the what I'm trying to say is the consumer education and kind of bringing people into the fold of these things is being inclusive about it and never pretentious or uh, you know, wanky about it. It's important to bring people into the fold on these things. And if anyone ever wants to talk to me, I will talk at you at great length about any of these things. You know, like I'm so thrilled to show people my barrels, and to
Yeah.
pull samples from them and be like, look how awesome this is. It's, you know, it's
Yeah.
6 months old, so it's you know, it's super bitter because it's not chilled out yet. You know, it's got like that's I'm
Yeah.
not even going to
Yeah.
think about pulling that for another year and a half.
Yeah.
So there's like, I love
It's
that aspect of my business. I love being able to share that with
yeah.
people. I would say like if I had to think of the core values of my business, that is one of them, is the education and kind of explaining this diversity of styles that are kind of unique to my business. Not unique to my business, but unique in our market at least,
Yeah.
to people who aren't necessarily as educated. But yeah, so
Well,
just
and I
being
think just
inclusive in general.
having those products, like, I mean, between all three of us, we've had the you know, blessings of working in the industry and having those experiences between other brewers where you're just like, you're tasting through something for better or for worse, kind of,
Yeah,
and you
yeah,
guys, and then you can see where the product is going or how it's going. Even just like getting staff to like taste beers off the tank before they're ready.
yeah,
Just
Yeah.
like,
totally.
and then like talk about like why it's not ready yet.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
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 Or like, why the brewery? Like, why did you come in today and the brewery smells like someone farted? Like, it's literally just like
Right.
the like brewery full of sulfur, and you're like,
Yeah.
like, how do you explain, you know,
Yeah.
what's going on there?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's really important to me, and or not. I think it is really important to me, and so it's yeah, through my social media and stuff like that, I'm always happy to like at great length describe what I've done and why I've done it, and things that led me to what made it the way it is. And I think that's been a big boon for me over the years, is and helped me kind of establish uh, the uniqueness of my brewery, but also the the difference in my beers. Like, what is the reason you should reach for one of my beers if you're trying to celebrate a special occasion, or you're looking to try something different, or whatever, you know? There's a lot of breweries, and a lot of them do similar / the same sort of things, you know? And so to be a brewery that just puts things in oak barrels and waits a long time, uh, you know, you got to explain that to people. You got to
Yeah.
give them the kind of, the why
Yeah. I think
is important.
that the thing that's really neat about Temporal is that you're just so focused on it. You have a very like singular focus on what you're doing, which like I think Aslan and I, as brewers at more production focused breweries, like we don't have that, right? We're making multiple products, we're making multiple beers because we have multiple offerings that are available all the time.
Mhm.
So it's hard for us to have that like singularity on one product at a time and go like you can kind of bring down 2 barrels and go, okay, like this Munich wine and these Buffalo Trace barrels like doesn't need tonka beans, because like why not throw more money
why not,
at it?
right? Yeah.
But right, but at least you can kind of rationalize yourself and make some really cool unique products, because you have that kind of like you have that time and that focus on it, and because of that you can create like some very unique products that I think for someone else like us can be possible, but it's super difficult to do and to do well as well, which is
That's it. Like there's
right?
not any inputs to like this beer, for example, that aren't like anyone could make this Munich wine. It's just that most breweries don't want to or don't have the space to put a bunch of barrels for years or whatever. It's like I understand what it's like being in a production brewery, because I'm literally sitting in a production brewery, right? Like I'm sharing this space with 2 brewers that have to make beers on a schedule, and every week we can a couple pallets full of cans and different beers, and there's 20 to 40 heck getting brewed every week. And I see that. I also am doing that. Like I brew all of the beers here right now. So like I know what it's like to make lager all the time. And I understand the necessity of that. And that's part of the reason why this is that's actually a really good segue into why this is like a perfect situation for me, right? Because there's almost no world where my business plan is commercially viable, right? Like I'm talking about how silly, like silly is maybe not the word, but like
we can dream,
but like I've kind of ran it every way you could think of, and there was a little while where I thought I was going to have my own space, and I ended up like putting a serious like offer in on place. I had a contractor, an architect lined up. We were like looking at the space, starting to price out things. I'd like put a bunch of money into different things, and didn't end up working out. Like the last second, the landlord like pulled out of the lease deal and was like, nah. And I'm so thankful for that, because I would have been like, that was like 2019 or like end of 2019, or maybe it might have even been like January 2020. It was like,
sheesh.
It was like, and so like
maybe
COVID alone would have destroyed me. But not only that, like I just didn't have the money for it. Taking a building and turning it into a brewery is insanely expensive. So it's kind of like I've looked at every possible way if I want to do this, and I don't want to stray from these principles that I have, and I don't want to compromise on the age or the quality of the beer. There's almost no way to make a living / like have a business that is viable. So being able to be a part of this with Slow Hand and Boombox, and to take over this space, which is already renovated as a brewery, which is awesome. It means that the turnaround is much faster. The production space is there. I don't have to worry about making lager, because someone else is. Well, I mean, me physically am making the lager, but like another brewery is worrying about bearing the costs and distribution of that lager. And so that keeps the lights on. And yes, I contribute obviously to like the rent and everything, but it's it's good to have a place that's like a shared home, and I as a person who's been making beer in a bunch of breweries for a long time, I think like I brewed my first batch in January 2018, so like that's 7 years ago now, that I brewed my first beers at Lupolo for Temporal. So to finally have a place that's like, I can see this seems like this is working, and is a long-term solution, because I have to worry less about the overhead. I can just focus on what I'm doing. Yes, I have to make a fooder full of table Saison, and I will have taps. I don't have to make that, but I chose to do that, and I will have taps to keep full. Because honestly, I was freaking out about. I think I have 3 taps that I'll have to always have 3 beers on tap, and I was like, oh God, like how am I gonna have 3 beers on tap? That means I have to actually own kegs, and I have to like actually put beer in kegs and actually carbonate it, and like how, even if it's like the slowest it could possibly be, I'll still probably go through a keg or 2 a week. Like, oh my God, that's so much beer. So anyway, I'm kind of rambling about it, but I'm stoked about this. I think it's fantastic.
we should have done a better job off the top, but like talking more about threefold.
Yeah, we did. I don't think we did it all, but
I
we
feel
kind of
bad
dove
not.
into it. That's all right.
It's one of those things that often Aslan and I do because we know about it, so we don't need to talk about it. But yeah, maybe like more formal question. Yeah, and maybe we'll add this in earlier. We'll see how it feels.
Yeah, you can.
I can cut it in post, but yeah, you're collaborating now with Boombox and Slowhand Brewing on a new venture called Threefold. Can you talk about that partnership and share what people can look forward to in the new space when it opens?
Hell yeah! So yeah, we teamed up to take over the space where Andina Brewing was. They went out of business, unfortunately. We were able to scoop most of their equipment at an auction for very inexpensive, and able to take over the space, lease the space, and yeah, we've been making beer, and we're working on the tasting room, making it the way we want it to be, and yeah, it's gonna be great.
You were saying hopefully slotted opening for.
I can't comment on that because it's not.
2025.
It's gonna be in the next couple of months. I don't know how long your turnaround on the podcast is, but in the next couple of months is probably a safe bet. Yeah, not like that's the fun thing about taking over a space that was a brewery, is that the drains are already in the floor. Like I think they paid like 40 grand. They had to dig up Powell Street and put in like an upgraded water line because the city said, hey, this building is like 120 years old or something.
Yeah, and David did that with Powell just down the street.
Yeah, because all the warehouses, they're not meant to be a brewery, so they're all plumbed in from the city water supply with I think like a 3/4 inch pipe. And for whatever reason, I mean, it makes sense because you need water supply, but I think you have to have a 2-inch pipe. The city requires it, or something requires it. I mean, I guess if you don't want your HLT to take like 2 hours to fill,
I was gonna say
you need a 2-inch pipe. Yeah, it's just part of it. So they had to shut down this, and they had to upgrade this 120-year-old building, to add much bigger water intake, stuff like that. Anyway, point is that was already done. They've already done the power upgrades. They've already done all these things, right? So that. That was a huge boon to us in our turnaround, and kind of the timeline of it all. And
so it's kind of like three breweries in one.
3 breweries in one. That's right. And it's perfectly complementary. Like Slowhand is a lager focused brewery. They make the crispiest and most delightful lagers and pale ales. They have an IPA that's delightful. It's like, it's a modern West Coast kind of IPA. It's not a hazy IPA. It's a very crisp and refreshing beer. So Slowhand, they're on lock with that crispy thing. They've got it. They've got it down pat. And then you've got Boombox, who, started out at Callister years ago, moved on through a couple different breweries similar to me, hadn't had a home. Most recently, they were at Parallel 49. And since they stopped making beer there, they haven't been anywhere. They've kind of been deciding what they want to do. And I think they had come independently before they knew that I had looked at this space and that Chris from Slowhand had looked at this space. The Boombox guys had also come and looked at the space. And then we all independently came to the conclusion, this building is ridiculously big. Like it's like almost 10,000 square feet of brewery, which is absurd. And in the middle, not in the middle of Vancouver, but in East Van, Vancouver, it's not a cheap place to rent a warehouse,
not the cheapest
let alone
commercial space.
Yeah, let alone a massive commercial space. So we all independently had looked at it and gone, hey, that is a nice space and it's already a brewery. That's a huge boon, but it's humongous and way too big for our needs. So yeah, Boombox predominantly makes IPAs of the hazy variety, but they also do have some clearer things, but mostly hazy IPAs. And also they play around with just kind of I guess it would be like the extremes, because the hazy beers are to the maximum for the hops. Like there's so much hops in those beers. Like it blows my mind. Like are
you sure this is right?
Yeah, well, exactly. Like I'm the one putting the hops into it, and I'll be like dumping just bag after bag. We have one tank. You have to it's up against a mezzanine. You have to go up on a ladder and like kind of go along like it's almost like a crawl space. It's like maybe 3 feet high. You kind of have to crawl along, like pushing your box of hops, and then you get up to the tank and you're dumping all the hops in.
Yeah.
Yeah, just bag after bag after bag, like 60, 80 kilos of hops. It's a lot of hops. Anyway, so Boombox likes to push the boundaries of things, and they're really intense. They have a beer called Midnight Train that's an imperial stout with like a coconut and vanilla and coffee and cocoa nibs. And I had the joy of packing that all into the fermenter, and it was like I thought I put an absurd amount of coconut into a beer. I did a coconut barley wine a few years ago, and it was like what I consider to be a massive amount of coconut, like nice toasted coconut, and they probably exceeded that ratio. But also it was so much more beer that it was just like bags and bags full of coconut. Yeah. I put so much coconut in there. I tied it off on the carb stone. Because I was like, but you have to keep the bags submerged in the beer so you get the extraction. I ended up like recirculating the tank and kind of whirlpooling it a bit.
Yeah.
When I tore the tank down to get the coconut out at the end, I realized that it actually bent the carb stone a little bit. It was so much coconut, and I was like, this is absurd and delightful. The beer is fantastic, and all the more better for it, right? There's something about that amount, putting that amount of anything into a beer that will make it very special, right? I think Midnight Train is fantastic beer. But that's an example. Yeah, Boombox loves to push the boundaries of these things. So so we kind of came together on this, and we realized, we take our crispy brewery and we add our IPA brewery, and then we add me and my weird 2 very different things that I make, the Saison farmhousey things, but also sour things. Yeah. And then the other side of my production is the barley wine imperial stout, very intense, very strong things. Yeah. And together, the 3 of us actually make like one functional brewery, or maybe not functional, one complete brewery. So we all kind of, there's not a lot of stepping on toes. Like, yes, Slowhand makes a hoppy pale ale, and so does Boombox, but they're so completely different from the beginning of the recipe formulation to the brewing to the fermentation profile. To the dry, like it's all, So it's I couldn't think of a better pairing. I personally feel a little chuffed because that was, I think it was my idea to introduce these people. I've known the Boombox guys for 10 plus years. I've known the Slowhand guys for probably 7 or 8 years. And so I feel a little responsible, and but also like, I'm so pleased. I'm chuffed about it in the best way.
That's great. Yeah.
And then we also had the fun challenge of bringing everyone's brand together, which is like, for me in Slowhand, it's like wood and classy metal and like kind of cozy vibes. And then Boombox is like 80s neon, like it's synth and funk. And it's like, that's like the not exact opposite, but it's like a very different vibe. So that was a fun one. Yeah, that's not a task I had to take on, thankfully, because I'm not a designer, but the tasting room's got some cool stuff going on. I can't wait. You guys are gonna love it. Everyone's gonna love it. It's gonna be awesome. That was
the little sneak peek I got taking up the beers was pretty cool. I'm excited for it. Looks like a cozy space. Looks like good place to sit by and have a few.
There was a guy today painting like neon red paint, and I was like, anyway, that's awesome. That's the rambly explanation of what Threefold is. It's called Threefold. We realized we needed kind of a name for the place, because you can't have people saying like, hey, I'm going down to Temporal Boombox and Slowhand later. Do you want to come have a beer? It's like, that's way too wordy. You can't do that. And then you don't want people necessarily to be like, I'm going to go down to Slowhand later, because Slowhand also has a brewery. Or like, I'm going to go down to Boombox later. Anyway, so we were like, we need a brand for the tasting room. It's got to have its own, it's got to have its own vibe and its own thing.
Identity kind of thing, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we've done a good job of that. Threefold is it's a good kind of like coming together of these things. And and even like the name, Threefold, there's 3 of us. It's great.
Yeah, sweet. Awesome. Aslan, you got anything else? Questions?
Yeah.
Burning questions?
No, I guess I guess like at this point, obviously you're in the middle of a build out. You probably don't have a lot of time outside of brewing. But when you do have time, what do you do? What's your thing?
Yeah. I mean, I don't have a lot of time. That's totally right. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like, I like to eat good food and drink good drinks. So, we'll go out and have a cocktail or something.
You got some favorite spots?
We went to Bar Corso for the first time the other day, and
Nice.
that was really cool on Commercial Drive, just like a few blocks from first. They
Nice.
have some nice cocktails. Love the Magnet. We go to the Magnet just to go for fun.
Yeah.
That's a delightful spot.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Incredible food, curated tap list. Yeah.
Exactly. Good. Yeah, get some good beer, get some good food, get a cocktail. Yeah, I don't know. I don't do a whole lot. I'm pretty much here a lot these days. Like the last like handful of days I've been building. I bought a bandsaw so I could cut these gigantic blocks of wood so that I could build this rack for these big barrels. And so I've been cutting weird angle cuts and curved angle cuts. It's like, gotta have a bandsaw. So I just had to go buy a bandsaw. It's a whole this is how these things happen, and then the endless acquisition of things continues.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. That's kind of a cop-out answer. I like to eat and drink good things, but I don't really do a whole lot. I don't really have a lot of hobbies.
Market research.
Yeah, I enjoy good beer, and get together for a bottle share or something. But yeah, don't really do a whole lot. Hoping to travel a little more once I'm not forever brewing everyone's beer here. It's kind of a interim solution until we eventually we'll hire a brewer at some point. And so at that point, I'll probably take a little couple week vacation or something. Kat and I are hoping to go to the UK and do a little trip around there and get away from it. Because I don't really get away. I just kind of work a lot.
Fair. Yeah, and for anybody getting into the scene like you, much like a lot of us have had a untraditional way of carving out a path. But you got any advice for anybody who's looking to get into, working in craft beer?
That's a good question. And also one that I should have thought about beforehand. It can be tough. But I think you just at least for me, you have to just kind of follow the thing that you care about, which for me is I've kind of structured my business in a way that's not hard for me anymore. I know the things I care about, and I am lucky enough that I've set myself up in such a way that I can just go for that. You've got to find things that you care about, that you're passionate about. If you feel strongly about a Scotch ale, then, if you're an assistant brewer, just keep pestering your head brewer until he lets you make a Scotch ale. You got to find something you care about. And it's not an easy industry, especially right now, with the contraction that's happening. And, there's a lot of breweries that are having trouble getting by. And that's not easy and not fun. But if you find the thing that you like in there and you care a lot about it and you push for that, if you can show people that you're stoked about it, that gets people excited. That's kind of been my whole thing this entire time. If I wasn't so excited about my beers, I don't think people would buy them. But the fact that I'm stoked about it and that I can convey that and express that in a way that people relate to, or at least is entertaining or educational for them, that's what makes it for me. There are days when I'm super tired. If I brew for 20 hours, I go home and I fall asleep. It sucks, but the pain of it is forgotten relatively quickly, and then I have beer for a long time that I'm slowly drawing down.
Nice.
Yeah, I think my advice, even if you're taking a non-traditional approach, find the thing you care about, chase it down, make it happen. Right? The hardest part is making that first step. That's something I remind myself about often. I'm really good at procrastinating or putting things off. The hardest part for me is just getting started. And once you get started, steps it has to keep happening, And that's how I suddenly have hundreds of hectoliters of beer in barrels.
And are an internationally known brewer at this point.
That's true.
I guess, yeah, there are people that I've had my beer in a bunch of different countries. I see people drinking it all the time in the most random places. I'll see like a check-in from like Sweden on Untapped, and I'm like, how did my beer get to Sweden? That's crazy.
You're ending up on sought after bottle trades, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if people know about Canadian beer, but if people knew about Canadian beer, I'd hope that I'm on their list. You know, it's like yeah, that's what happens when you make special things. You know, like I'm kind of naturally skewed towards that crowd of people that are going to seek things out because they're the enthusiasts. You know, an enthusiast isn't necessarily going to go seek out like a brown ale or something, but a barrel aged barley wine they're going to be stoked about. So you can feed on that excitement, and that's the thing I'm stoked about. So I could, you know, let me tell you, if you like that, here's, you know, something else.
For sure.
Yeah. So that's what it's all about. It's all about just kind of, you care about something, you make it happen, and you figure it out, you know?
Yeah, you've made it this far. Like you said, you started in like 2018 and you're in 2025 still doing the same, like just still following that passion.
Still following it.
That's cool.
No one cares about Saison, but I'm going to keep making it. And I think that like it's a gamble, because I think if I keep making it and I keep telling people, hey, Saison is great. I think I'll be able to sell my amount of Saison, and that's what matters to me, that I at least move that.
Exactly. I mean, it allows me to rationalize less trips to Bellingham. So
yeah, there you go. I hope that this can stand up to the American beers we can get in Bellingham. There's a lot of good stuff you can get down there.
Yeah. Sweet. Well,
cool.
Thanks for doing this, Tristan.
My pleasure.
If people want to find your beer, where can they find Temporal Beer?
That's a fun question. Yeah, I don't really sell a lot of beer. You can check out, there's a couple liquor stores around town. The Gull is one that's particularly well stocked. They're in North Van. There's Brewery Creek and Legacy. Jack's liquor stores might have some, but your best bet is probably to send me a message. And I can point you in the right direction. And Slow Hand, actually, I should have said this off the top. Slow Hand at their little brewery on 1830 on Powell Street. They have a whole little fridge of my beers. So
perfect. There you go.
At least at the time of this recording, there's like 8 or 10 different beers in there. And I kind of keep it well stocked. And that's kind of like the little mini threefold until we get the space cracking. They've got the boombox stuff there as well. So it's kind of, we're using that as our little retail outlet for now. In terms of where you can actually find my beer, that's pretty much it. There's not a lot. You can follow me on Instagram. It's at Temporal Beer. And I do bottle releases here and there. I haven't lately because I've been so busy, partially making everyone else's beer, but partially just getting into this new space, building a rack for my barrels, and sorting out what I'm keeping and what I'm doing as I'm consolidating all my stuff here. Because this is the first time I'm bringing all this stuff into a space that's smaller than it was. So
getting settled.
So where to find my beer is a tough question. Yeah. The easy answer is just send me a message. I'm like happy to point you at somewhere where you can find something.
We've sometimes got it here in Penticton at the Jack's / Angry Otter. So it's not like it's not possible to get it where you are, but take a peek and look for all the bottles look like this, so that's easy to look.
Exactly. Yeah, there's going to be some new labels for the table Saison. I'm working on a cool thing. Shout out to Michelle, Michelle Lebois does all the labels, and she's the best. And she's working on like a watercolor thing for the new table Saison. We're doing something funky. There's going to be a neck label, which is going to really suck for me. Ooh. I chose this. Yeah. I'm going to put them all on by hand. It's going to be awful. But it's going to be like a day of putting neck labels on. That's going to really suck. And then the beer will look like real special, right? Because if you're trying to sell something in a bottle in this climate, like you got to make it look good.
All in.
Yeah. So shout out to Michelle. She's working on a cool thing. It's going to look sick.
Sweet. Yeah. Cool. And if you want to support us, the podcast, Why This Beer, you can follow us on Instagram and Facebook, and we're on YouTube as well. All the socials. You can support us by buying our beer as well. You can find neighborhood brewing at good liquor stores near you, as well as Main Street Brewing's beer. Anything else to add, Aslan?
I think that's everything. Thank you so much, Tristan.
Thanks, Tristan.
For taking the time.
My pleasure, guys. Thanks
for
having
me here. Cool beers.
Yeah.
Some It's been a long time since I've had a Saison like that, so it's
Yeah.
great.
I'm really proud of it. Yeah. Glad you guys like it.
Sounds good. Well, I'm excited to see you in the new space. That'll be great.
Yeah. Please come down when you're in town.
Yeah.
Shoot me a message. Come on by.
Sounds good. All right. Well, until
Thanks
next
again,
guys. Cheers.
Cheers.